Welcome to the Prosthetics and Orthotics Podcast with Brent Wright and Joris Peels. Hi everyone, this is Joris Peels and the Prosthetics and Orthotics Podcast with Brent Wright. Hi Brent, how are you?
Hey Joris, yeah, good to be on again. Excited about this one as well.
Okay. Yeah, so who do we have on today, Brent?
So we have Dr. Jenny Chen, and I'm going to let you intro since you already know her pretty well, but we've done some stuff together as well with 3D Heals, and so I'm super excited to just get her perspective on, I don't even want to say an outsider, Jenny, so don't take that wrong, but outside looking in, what she thinks of the orthotic and prosthetic field.
So for those of you who don't know, Jenny Chen is a radiologist. And for most people, that would just stop at that. They'd play golf on the side and, that would be a life. But Jenny is I don't know. I don't know how you do it really, Jenny. I don't. She's probably one of the hardest working people in 3D printing because on top of that, she's an investor and invests in companies, evaluates companies as an angel investor and advisor to firms, and she also is the founder of 3D Heals. And 3D Heals is a network of people in multiple cities across the world now that are mostly medical clinicians and medical people around the medical industry, but also vendors and stuff. They're all, getting to know each other, working together to get medicine and digitization of medicine approved. So are approved and working and all that. And, kind of taking deep dives into polymers for implants and that kind of stuff. And that's also something that Jenny started. And she also does more things besides this. So I don't know how you keep up, Jenny. I really don't.
First of all, I would need some kind of prosthetics to play golf because I tried to learn many times and I could never play golf. And I would say in terms of healthcare 3D printing, I consider myself more of a generalist. I started off more of a wanting to make anatomical models like every other radiologist. But then I started to realize that there's a much wider world out there that can benefit a lot larger population. And obviously the O&P industry is one of probably the most popular field. A lot of people who I know are participating in or working in. So that's a bit of a short journey, is basically wanting to make anatomical models and then pivoted into now interested in everything. And yeah, as 3D Heals we have three main purposes, and also that I'm trying to focus, because I'm very easily distractible person. So I try to focus. Number one is we want to continue to educate everybody as much as possible, use a free platform. We have some webinars and also some podcasts. And then number two is we used to organize a lot of physical events before the pandemic, although we are trying to revive that. But I think right now it's still kind of hard to allow us to connect people. And number three is, like you said, I invest in startups. And I find that process extremely enjoyable because I love to talk to founders, innovators, people who are willing to step outside of the box and then try to do good to the world.
I think that's super neat. And Jenny, if you can share a little bit too, 3D Heals was like 2013, 2014, right? That's when I kind of started to know who you are.
The company is officially founded in 2015. It's a long time. So, yeah.
For 3D printing, that seems like an eternity, right? So, I'd love to hear just what your perspective is on a general level, not hopping into O&P yet, but just where do you think the big change has been from 2015 to now 2022?
That's a pretty big question, but a very good question, because I never thought I'd be this old. Talking about 7 to 10 years and 30 years now, I just never thought that I would be the observer who can observe these changes. But just within this, I would call a short 7 years, I have seen a lot of companies come and go, a lot of lovely founders who've, founded companies with full enthusiasm and then didn't really result in anything they were hoping for. So there are those failure cases, but there are a lot of success cases, obviously. There are companies that I invested in who exited, and also there are companies who are now growing much bigger than it was before. So some of the biggest trend I have observed is that number one is the startup founders are a lot more thoughtful, more experienced, and also the investor ecosystem is also growing with them. I think the understanding of how powerful 3D printing can be is maturing in an entire ecosystem. So it's not just limited to the innovators, the early adopters anymore. It's like everybody now have better understanding on what 3D printing can do deeper instead of just more superficial understanding previously. So because of this maturity, more investors are also coming into the field, even investors from insurance companies, VCs from very reputable firms are now paying attention and even invested in some of the startups now. So I think overall the innovation entrepreneur ecosystem is maturing. That's the number one trend. And number two is I do think overall for the healthcare innovation space, it's not just 3D printing, is that this you versus me, clinician versus technologists kind of mentality, that line is blurring. It used to be like, we want to disrupt. So like get rid of all the doctors so that, we'll just use computers, treat people, that kind of mentality. I think it helped kind of like to kind of break the mode and to allow people to think differently, which is not too bad. I like people who do that. But I think now, the attitude is more collaborative, more of let's reach across the aisle, talk to each other and see what your needs are, what my needs are, and what can we do things together. I think that attitude is commendable. I think that's also a sign of maturity. So that's another biggest trend is I see the technologists side, innovators, both sides, I would say the clinicians as well, are more open to talk to one another. So that's another big trend I'm observing.
Do you think, and I'm seeing that a lot in the orthotic and prosthetic field, do you think that also is because, they know that they need the other person too, to actually make something that works, whether it's software or hardware or whatever? It's like, hey, we actually need doctors to use our product and then that does whatever for them. Is that where you see the collaboration is happening?
I would say you could say that's a need, but I would say if you want to be a successful entrepreneur, it's a want. Because, at the end of the day, you're trying to solve a problem, right? If you don't understand the problem or even not focusing on the right problem, then your product is not very useful. So number one thing is it doesn't matter if your customers are patients or hospitals or other clinicians. At the end of the day, you need to fully understand exactly what problem you want to focus on. And then having that clinical deep, I would say, understanding of what patients' needs are and the art form of the practice, that is not easily replicatable by computer algorithms.
Yeah, I think, and I agree with that totally. And I think it's really, I agree also with your trends, but I also think it's a reality that, especially for medical, there's a regulatory barrier. It takes a long time. It takes a long time to get cash. The runway is long as well. It takes a lot of years as well as cash as well. You can't just do this overnight, And so especially in that area, I see a lot of people working together because they have to. So it's not even like cuddly. It's like no one's going to make it if we don't all work together, right? Because we can't all get enough investor cash and enough revenue to really survive to make it to another day.
Definitely.
I don't know if that's a bit bleak, maybe.
It's not bleak. Working with us is great. It's fun.
And do you think that the for you is 3D printing like, well, you've done 3D heal, so apparently you think there's a lot there, right? Do you think it's like this 3D printing digitization is like the future of medicine? Is it like a force multiplier for doctors? What's your level of like how much this additive manufacturing digitization thing is going to change medicine?
I think it's already changing. We've been talking about this for a number of years. I think the change is slow, right? The selling into hospitals and selling it to the healthcare system is not an easy task. It takes years to get some kind of new product to the hospitals. Obviously, it goes along with that is the mentality of the older generation of physicians to adapt to the new technology. But I think overall trend that the computers and digital manufacturing are taking over the world is a reality. I mean, I think nobody should even doubt that anymore. We're not going to be replaced by robots. I think that vision is kind of naive. But robots are going to come to our world more in your face way for sure in the next decade. I'm pretty sure about that.
What do you feel? And I love that you talked about the older physicians. Do you find that is there like a divide? Some people love it, some people hate it, and there's nothing in between? Or do you find that a lot of people are accepting it and perhaps embracing it?
Yeah, I think since I'm no longer young, I want to make a distinction about mentally young youth and mentally old, quote unquote old. So it doesn't matter what age you are in. It's really about mental flexibility of how open you are to a new way of practicing, right? So recently I read this book. It's pretty good. I'm still reading it actually. It's called Range. It talks about experts and why they're good at doing some things. And, it actually mentioned when you actually are an expert in a narrow field, it can be a disadvantage to you sometimes because then you're not looking out to see what other 100 solutions can solve the same problem because you're so good at it, you're succeeding every time. Why would you want to look outside, right? So some of these like very skilled clinicians who are already succeeding in their practice and very comfortable, there's less reason for them to change, and I understand that. But it's more short term because they get short term reward. Right now, they're doing pretty well. Their practice is growing, but the next 10, 20, 30 years, can their practice, the way they're practicing, still survive and benefit larger humanity? And for the newer generation or people who are open to learn new skills, they can acquire entirely new skills. They're okay to abandon the old way of doing things. One is they may not even know how to do the things old way, and two is they're just flexible that way. Then they can, basically invest in a more longer term view on how this industry, for example, the OMP is going towards. And then, maybe they're not going to profit right away. Maybe it's next 5-10 years that they're going to start to see some profit, and there's going to be a little bit of struggle before. So that's how I'm seeing this new versus old generations of their mentality and why they're doing it.
And do you think, and so, right, the classical thinking now is like we're getting software, patient-specific guides, patient-specific medicine, maybe some topology optimization on implants and stuff like that. Then we move into intermediates and then move into bioprinting. Do you see it happening like that gradually? Is that how it's going to roll out, let's say?
Well, I think a lot of things are actually happening simultaneously. I think the things I'm seeing that's improving in OMP is also being adopted in bioprinting, which definitely in terms of organ printing, and that's not going to come for a long, long time. Things like machine learning, AI, machine vision, automation, that kind of big concepts, they're being developed in parallel anyways, right? We have better AI engine now, we have better cloud computing ability. So these bigger picture can definitely empower any of these parallel 3D printing space.
But is that, this is interesting, it's more of a doctory question because like we have, I think in the Netherlands and other countries, we have like technical medicine as like as a career thing. And we have more biomechanical engineer. Do you think, isn't just should we, like one way of looking at it is saying, look, you know what, we're a medium-sized medical practice. We should have a technologist on staff, right? She should be an engineer and she should keep up to date with all this AI, machine learning, all this nonsense. And we should just do the doctoring stuff. Or is it something that like, a doctor has to keep up to date with the medical advancements and also the technological advancements in society?
Well, I think that's a very individual choice. It depends on the specialty that you're in. Me, I don't need to learn any of this technology stuff, but I'm just really innately interested and curious. My practice that I'm in has a very solid IT department. And they're updating us all the time with new software for enterprise practices all the time. So I because radiology is a very technically focused field, we have a very dedicated, very excellent IT department. So I think it's very important. Now, the role that how you define it, it may not be a full-time person who's doing this. It has to be well defined. It can't just be completely explorative and talk about nanocomputing and stuff like that. And like, it has probably less relevance to immediate advantages to a practice. But I think almost any size of medical practice should consider increased efficiency and productivity and quality, right? All these like other metrics measure a medical practice can be optimized using technologies. So have somebody, maybe it could be a doctor who's really interested in technology to monitor the progress or evaluate products periodically, I think is a good idea.
With that, I'd love to dive into how you found out about the orthotic and prosthetic industry, and then really kind of some of the stuff that you've been putting out even recently around some of the software. But I'd love for you to take us on a little bit of just the history of how'd you find O&P, and then also, what are you seeing as far as shifting? Because for me, like I started around 2014 too, 3D printing, and boy, I look back at some of that stuff that I did in 2014, and I'm a little embarrassed, maybe a lot embarrassed, I don't know, but it is a journey. So I'd love to hear some of that, and I love to see all the videos and how you get so many people together. They may be in different spaces or even potentially quote unquote competitors, but you get them together on a panel or what have you to talk about their technology. So I really love that.
That's 3 questions, Brent, in one.
Yes. So let's start off with the first one. How did you find out about O&P?
Okay. So I would say O&P found me because when I first started 3D Heals, it was a meetup in San Francisco back then. And, all I knew about 3D printing, what it can do really was anatomical models. That's my narrow field. That's my vision back then. And then we started organize these educational panels, but then people are like, hey, you know what? Have you heard of Enable? This is like a huge world organization all over the world making huge impact in humans' lives. And why don't you host something around that subject? So that's how I first got in touch with, I think I remember Scott Summit presented, I believe. And then Andreas Bastian, back then it was Autodesk. And obviously they're all moving on to cool things. So that's how I first encountered them. And then throughout the lifetime of 3D Heals, O&P space has always been it's a quite popular topic everybody wants to hear about, wants to do. I think there's one is people, it's visible, right? The impact, the positive impact you can make to another human being is very visible. You made this limb for this other human. That's huge. I mean, that's incredible feeling, rewarding, right? And 2 is people think it's probably easier than putting an implant in someone's body. The regulatory process is not as restrictive. And, because of these 2 factors and then going along with the 3D printer companies thinking, you can put a 3D printer in everybody's home so everybody can do this. And, starting this decentralized manufacturing hub to supply the world with missing limbs, prosthetics, orthotics. That vision it's credible. I mean, if it works, you can actually help the world that way. So I think that's how this topic is pretty impactful still. And a lot of people who got started in healthcare 3D printing space started with prosthetics, orthotics, because of that reason. So that's how I came in touch with O&P. And over the years, I'm seeing an evolution of how people are doing things better, more evidence-based, more science-based. And also the technology itself is also evolving to more focusing on smoother workflow, and not just the 3D printing part, but the whole entire workflow of managing a patient, either remotely or in your office. So I also see evolution there.
Yeah. And do you think it's do you think it's a bit the OMP is like in the US it's kind of its own island, but we also had a project at one point, and I naively asked this orthotics or this prosthetics lab. I was like, "Oh, can we see the CT scans and stuff?" Right, and they didn't have them because they're not used to working with them. It's like, do you think there's like kind of like this thing about because like this prosthetics and orthotics is like its own little island, and then you've got podiatrists and you've got the rest of the doctors all kind of like it's a kind of a bit separate, you know? Do you think that's detrimental or?
Yeah, I mean, that's always a debate, is subspecialization versus generalist. Because when you become super subspecialized, you lost the peripheral vision. And I don't know. I don't know a good answer to that. So I think it may be interesting to see people working together. And that's why we actually created 3D Heals. Is I kind of curious to see if people from totally different world come together and then just being almost forced to sit down and have a conversation, what that conversation is going to be. And what's interesting in results is that people really enjoyed it. They learned something, they taught something, they found the exchange extremely valuable to their own work. So I think people just kind of need to be encouraged to take that first step.
Yeah, totally. And I think if we're looking at this OMP thing, I mean, what trends are you seeing specifically in OMP? I mean, what are you seeing happening in OMP where you're like, that's interesting, or what are you looking at the moment?
Well, it depends on what market we're looking at. I think the majority of the market for missing limbs is probably still in a developing country. So, but regardless, I think a more well-integrated digital workflow, no matter where you are, and also it has to be probably customized to local practice. That is going to be a definitive way of going forward, which is better workflow, more digitalized, more consistent, uniform. So that's number one, and then that the workflow itself can incorporate various automation process from image acquisition to design to manufacturing, which a lot of the later startups now are tackling. So digitalization of the workflow, I guess that's how you call it, is probably the number one. Number two is just entire 3D printing space in healthcare is quality control. People are definitely, this is becoming the top priority of everybody who is making medical devices, is quality control. How do you ensure consistency, higher quality products? And then the number three is I'm seeing new materials. Although I'm not a material scientist, I have to admit to that. There's definitely a lot more new materials are coming out that are in particular friendly to extrusion type of 3D printing, because that's the most widely available printer worldwide if you consider the markets. But obviously the resin space, the photopolymer, SLA, SLS space are also innovative, have a lot more class one materials available from different suppliers. So that's number three, materials.
Yeah. And you think you invest, right, as an investor, right?
Yeah.
And you look at a lot of. By the way, I scout startups for people in 3D printing. I really like your choices in startups, like some of the ones like NanoCon and stuff like that. And these ones I really like, and I'm really a big fan of Craft Health and all this kind of stuff. So I really think you've got a unique eye, I think, because I think you are a doctor. You look at really differently at these things than other people do. Does that give you an edge, do you think?
I don't know if I have an edge, right? If I have like all of them exited, IPO'd or acquired, then I say maybe I do have an edge, but I really can't say that I have excellent batting record. I think it's more of a personal choice that these are my teams. If we were talking about sports, I like to root for them because I like the people. I feel like I understand them. We can have mutual valuable exchanges when we're talking about 3D printing. And I feel like I can be helpful to them because of my own network. So that's actually my number one, is looking at the people. Can I work with them? Can I help them? Can I really contribute value to the startup? And I believe I can. I think investing is an art that everybody wants to master, but very few people can. And I believe I'm not there. I'm far from there. I'm still learning. But I'm obviously rooting for them and like these companies. I think they can potentially be unicorn. Obviously, everybody think their portfolio is the same way. So, but yeah.
But I think volumetric, for example, I would agree with you on volumetric, Nanocon, Sugar Lab, maybe Craft Health as well, Trio Labs as well. A NutriSense I don't know, and Amplify I don't know either.
Yeah, those two are not in 3D printing. They're just
okay. That would explain.
just companies. I think they can make money. That's all. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm very monoculture. I don't do anything else. And that's not a joke. Okay, but so I do think that those ones do have potential. I love Craft Health, by the way. I think they're fantastic.
Yeah.
And Trio Labs as well. I think that's really great. But so far you haven't invested in OMP. Is it? And we've talked this a couple of times. It's come up, but that it's difficult to make money in OMP. It's kind of difficult to invest in it. On the one hand, it's so fragmented. Is that something that's withholding you as an investor, or just not the right company?
It's not because I think OMP is hard to make money. That's why I'm not investing. It's because of valuation. By the time I encountered some of the startups, for example, Spenties is a company that I have championed.
Love them. I love them.
Years ago, but back then they're already in Series A, which is way too late for me in terms of valuation stage. So there are a lot of reasons investors don't invest. It's not because of the company itself, really, because you calculate the chance of you succeeding in that investment. I'm rooting for them. I still invite Spenties to speak at my webinars and write articles for us. I love the founders. They're very enthusiastic, energetic, and very optimistic. I love that. There's really absolutely nothing wrong with that company. It's just I don't think I can make money. So
okay. And if I'm listening, let's say I have an idea, what's the best way to pitch to you? What would I do?
Oh, you just go online and you submit an application, pitch 3D. You have to be in early stage, so you can't be past Series A. So if you're Series B, I mean, I'm still happy to converse. I'm still happy to connect, but pitch 3D is probably not going to be for you because there's just multiple that the group of investors that we're connected to are looking for, and once you've passed the B stage, they're not as interested.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And do I is there a document to fill out? Do I send you a deck? What's the thing?
Yeah, both. So we have an application online and you send me a deck and then we schedule a short call or a long call. I'm happy to talk to entrepreneurs. I think that's the most fun thing in this whole process, really.
Okay, I can imagine that. And how selective are you? You've done I think about 10 investments now or something that I know about. Are you how many companies do you talk to, and how many do you evaluate?
So the deal flow itself is actually not very high volume because the number of startups that specifically do healthcare focused 3D printing or bioprinting that are investable are not that many. So I mean, maybe I'm missing the picture here, but if you have a company in the space, please apply, let me know. But a lot of the innovations coming for the hard science, more of improved 3D printing technology, process, materials, agnostic of applications. But I see that a lot more. But it hasn't been applied to healthcare specifically. So because of that filter, the number of companies actually dramatically decreased. So the number of healthcare 3D printing companies I evaluate is less than 2 dozens per year right now for me.
What did you say? Sorry?
Less than 2 dozens. So
Okay. Wow. Yeah. So you have to be really selective then. Yeah.
It's automatically filtered. So yeah.
So I'm super naive to this investment world and that sort of thing. Just like Joris made a funny comment like, "Hey, this is all I do is 3D printing stuff." It's like this is kind of all I do. I do 3D printing in the orthotic and prosthetic space, right? But when you're looking, and that's where I'm super curious, when you're looking, from a general side and then this healthcare specific side of things. What are some of the tangible and non-tangible things that you're looking at as an investor, just so I can get an idea? And, I know there's probably some people in our audience that are interested in that as well.
Yeah, I think my number one, or a couple things. Number one is to see the market size. If the market size is too small and there are a lot of competitors, that could be problematic. And number two is founders, which I actually personally I use this as my number one. We'll see if that works because I don't know what the end so far has been good. Is to see how tenacious the founders, how visionary the founders are. I'm not going to say everybody is a nice person because everybody is a nice person, but everybody has some quirks too. It doesn't matter. It's as long as you have a very strong vision, very a lot of focus on what you're doing and conviction and resilience to failure and no's. I think that's a really good sign. Number two is like, I can have a conversation with you because I'm also a quirky person. I'm nice, but I also have my own quirks. So the chemistry has to be right. So it's kind of a personal choice, but I think actually it's important down the line because if I'm going to be batting for you all the way to make intros, to help you strategize, to, anything I can do to help you to get your words out there, then I have to feel like I can talk to you like a friend. So that's how I'm picking that second element. And obviously you have to look at your business model if this is logical. And in terms of the market size, the product market fit part is basically, are you solving a problem that's worth solving? Is there a large population out there who really needs this problem to be solved? So and obviously you have to look at the business model and see if that's this way that you're doing things can actually make money.
What would be the number one, like, just absolute, you just bombed, I just turned something into Pitch 3D and it's like, I'm not even going to respond to that. Or you get into it and you're like 2 minutes in and you're like, this isn't going to work. What would be your number one, like, hey, this before you even talk investment stuff, you need to have this under control or together?
Yeah. I mean, I see a lot of those. So bad examples are plenty. And I'm not going to mention the really bad examples, but I'm going to mention some a little bit bad examples are people who don't even have a prototype and haven't even found could create a legal entity behind their company. Mm-hmm. That is way too early. It's like in my head, I have an idea. Okay, I'm going to talk to Jenny to give me some money. Like that is not going to work. I don't think it's going to work for anybody. But I like the spirit in general. But that kind of conversation, there are too many, and so right now I'm not really open to that.
Now, for a little while in your LinkedIn post, and I don't know, or in your LinkedIn profile, you had a thing about NDAs, like not interested. So I'm in agreement with you, but with that. But just tell me a little bit about that. I think the NDA thing is very interesting, right? And at what point does that start making sense, or does it ever make sense? I guess it would if you get a little bit deeper, but just for my sake, I'm kind of curious on that.
Yeah. I think it's a culture in Silicon Valley for VCs, even though I'm not a VC, to not sign any NDA just to have a conversation. I mean, can you imagine the inefficiency of having to sign a legal document that takes hours for your lawyer to read before you can even have a conversation to see if you're interested in investing in this startup? It just doesn't make any sense. I understand the startup side for protecting yourself, that you don't want to share all the information. I think for me to make that statement is basically give people a boundary, where to set my boundary. Okay, so if you want to have a conversation with me, okay, but understand that even though I'm a reputable person who has integrity, and I usually do not say anything that I'm not supposed to say, I'm not going to sign any documents for you to protect you from saying things you're not supposed to tell me before we're reaching that point in relationships. Mm-hmm. And I also belong to angel groups, and we don't sign NDA for talking to startups, and they actually share data room with us, and there are a lot of confidential stuff in there. But it's basically, handshake between the investor and entrepreneur. that if we're going to start this kind of conversation, that nobody should do anything out of line that our culture approves. So if I'm a VC and I start to talk about stuff I'm not supposed to talk about in public space, then future startups are going to know that, and nobody's going to approach this person anymore. That they're just, it's just not cool. You're not supposed to do that. So I think we're also self-disciplined to not to talk about stuff that should not be disclosed to the public.
Yeah, I really like that. I think that's a great point too. And it's like, hey, if this doesn't fit your culture, then I'm not the right person to invest with you anyway.
I've literally had
lawyers
this
involved in everything. I really don't like to get lawyers involved. Every time I ask my lawyer anything, it becomes a disaster. Like, even if it's not a disaster, because they tend to think of the worst case scenario of human relationships. And you have to have a sense of optimism and confidence in your relationship. Otherwise, don't invest in the startup. Otherwise, don't ask for money from this investor if you don't trust this person.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've also found that the people who are too scared about sharing the idea often only have that idea, and then there's nothing on the execution part.
Yes.
Right. And I've also found people that have told me too much, where I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, like slow down. I don't want to know this. I really don't. And the other thing I think that you haven't mentioned, I think is really important. I've been doing this 3D printing thing for a while. So I've had a couple of situations where we finally learn something, and then I'm like, oh, I need to tell you, I did this 5 years ago, exactly the same. And we did this with a company, or we worked on a project that's really similar. And, you don't want to be in a situation where somebody pitches you an idea that's really similar to something you invest in later, or you come up with later. That's really dangerous territory to be in as well.
Right. For sure.
Yeah. Anyway, so Jenny, another thing, okay, so if you look at as an investor at OMP, what do you think? I mean, I like your point about software, right? What kind of startups do you want to see, or is there a startup you've been waiting to invest in and you've not seen them yet?
Well, I'm not always focusing on OMP. I'm more like, what company makes sense with all the elements considered, right? Like the ones I just talked about. I would say I'm looking into the research side of things. There are a lot of research going on in the OMP space. Again, I'm a generalist. I'm not reading every single research paper in the space, but the more advanced electronics embedded wearable devices, which I have seen one maybe last year, but it's not quite OMP. It's more of a assisted device. I like to see more electronics, wearable devices that beyond just the fitting, but actually with electronics embedded, and then collecting data, and then, kind of creating a loop of optimization from the data acquired. I don't know if that exists.
Well, and I think just with the way insurance is going and all that stuff, you definitely have to prove outcomes, or like whatever device that it's actually being worn, it's doing so many cycles, spinal bracing, even some of the new bracing, electric bracing for spinal cord injuries or people that have upper extremity impairments. You want to make sure that those expensive devices are actually being used. And so I totally get, where a payer or a payer source is going to want to have some of that data ready to rock and roll. So I think that's a pretty interesting insight.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think in the back of my head, have some of the startups starting to do something, because I'm pretty sure whatever I can think of, somebody else is already thinking ahead of me. So I'm just hoping I can find that person.
Mm-hmm. And there's another thing, I love what Brent does. He goes to Guatemala and he helps out these people by fitting them and stuff like that. And we all saw the potential, and then the kind of disintegration of Enable as well. And we've also saw that there are commercial people talking this, but I just think there's some of these numbers, there's something like 20 to 30 million people in the developing world that don't have prosthetics and don't have orthotics,
Yeah.
This also is apart from what Brenda's doing, which is wonderful, and people should continue to do this, there's also kind of a market solution, right? Shouldn't there be a market solution? Wouldn't it be a wonderful startup to solve that problem commercially with something that kind of works at the price level that these people can afford it?
Yeah, that is actually a tougher question than it looks. So there are quite a few, especially a lot of smaller nonprofits in the past that I've known trying to tackle the issue. Actually, the one that's probably working the best right now is Victoria Hand Projects, which I talk to periodically. The problem is the local healthcare systems. I mean, first of all, we have to reverse engineer this and think about why do we end up. So the number I saw is 57 million people with no limbs worldwide, and majority of them are in third world country. And the cause of these is trauma, war. So, medicine a lot of times is a trickle down of socioeconomic issues of a particular region. So the disease and injuries of certain population oftentimes are caused by the government and the healthcare system that is imperfect or ineffective. So you have to think about the kind of environment you're going to be operating in. So yeah, it may be easy for a startup to get into Africa, for example, some small country in Africa, and just start delivering. But what they didn't realize is that the local government could be very corrupt, and people are very superstitious. They have all kinds of religious belief that don't want to wear this. Or they tell you they're going to wear it, they don't wear it. Or they're going to do stuff that just completely because, basically I'm assuming the startup is going to be outside of the country if you want to take over the world. Then you have to understand every single region like that. I would say in terms of capitalism, Western Europe and US, North America, probably the most mature capitalistic countries. And things that make complete sense to us don't make a whole lot of sense, actually, if you bring that system to some other country that have totally different political, social society, basically. Like you have to have the deeper understanding of the culture and the government and to navigate through the system. It could be very costly. What I'm trying to say is it can compound and costly.
But look at like the cell phone.
Yeah.
Right? The cell phone happened, right? And it was like something that was so compelling that it just happened. There weren't any cultural barriers. There weren't any kind of like problems there. And there were companies that went in and put in like GSM networks in places that were very difficult to put in GSM networks. I mean, if the proposition is there are technologies that penetrate global markets that are in the hands of many billions of people, with little to no localization, with little, just because they're so compelling.
Yeah, true. I mean, but the question is, can we really make these two as comparables? People, one is in healthcare and the other one is telecommunication. Missing a limb may not be, obviously it's a bad condition for a human being, but maybe some people need to survive with that phone. The human connection, it feels almost a need. And then people who have lived without limb for a number of years may need a phone more than a prosthetics. If you ask me that question.
And I think it's interesting too. I mean, Jenny, you hit on the cultural thing. You definitely have the religious aspect of things, but then you have just some of the cultural things. So one of the things that I run into is, and it's not so much in Guatemala, but some of the other countries, you have to have the leg, like if you're doing lower extremity, you have to have the leg shaped as humanly as possible, even though it may be covered up, or they're not going to wear it. They won't just wear it with a post, so it has to have some sort of cover on it. So let's say you get all that right, but then you move more to like an Asian culture, where the bathrooms are not bathrooms, but more like holes in the ground, and you've got to go in, or India, you've got to go into like a deep squat.
I've never thought about that.
You got to go into a deep squat to go to the bathroom. So then you're talking about a foot that has to have articulation. So you get into a deep squat, and then you start chasing these regional things, and they're all important to that person and in that culture for compliance, and it's different around the world.
Yeah, I think I've been a little down talking about this, but I think the optimists optimistic side of it is achievable. It just needs a company that actually knows how to do it and have a full understanding of the international markets. Obviously 3D printing enables decentralized manufacturing, so you don't really need to ship things. You can just produce locally, and you can design even centrally and then ship the design to customize to be more local. Like Brent was talking about the culture differences.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
This vision,
To me,
I think always there, but it's hard work. It's not easy. So I'm hoping to see someone like that. I think Victoria is doing pretty well, but obviously it's a nonprofit, and the growth rate is for a nonprofit organization is very different from a startup that has VC money.
To me, it would just be a question of like having literally like a franchise kind of program where you say, okay, you do the course, and the guys that got the highest kind of scores on the whole examination, the whole kind of O&P practitioner course that we can offer, they get funded by us. They get a territory, they get a printer, and they get all the equipment they need and go for it.
Great.
And it's a kind of a franchise model. And that to me is infinitely scalable. And then that guy will figure out, because he's in India, he needs to be successful with these toilet things, right? Because he's, because somebody else will have other problems, and then that'll be the localization. To me, that's a startup.
That is a startup. Now, if you want to talk about franchise, the question is, am I going to make money with this franchise, right? It comes down to that. So yeah, at McDonald's, we can all see the brand power and obviously the profit margin. So what's your proposition to me if I'm a prosthesist in India, or how much am I going to make if I adopt your technology and pass all your exams?
Yeah, we can make 80% of it. I don't care. You can buy in the beginning. I give you material. I give you a printer, and I give you the course, right? And you then do the work, and you get 80%. I get 20%. No problem.
What if it's negative 100%? What if there's a loss?
What do you mean?
Bottom line is, whatever this business is going to be, it has to make money to be profitable first, right? Like, so someone have to pay for the material. Someone has to pay for the labor and the software, the printer. There's a cost to somebody here. If you are, as a startup, say, this is all free to local practitioner, all I need you to do is to deliver. You are taking up a lot of risk, right? To say, I'm going to pay for everything, and then you do it.
Well, you're taking on risk, but you have to seed it in some way. You can seed it in easier countries, right? And then in easier countries, maybe you put somebody on the payroll, or you in the countries that you know it's profitable or really highly population dense, for example. Then you're going to maybe have the guy on a salary. And then in the more edge territories, then maybe it's more of a risk is on their side. It depends to me. To me, and there's a way to fund this to get this started, let's say. Or you just set up, an office doing it yourself, 100% yourself, in a place like Lagos or a place like, Nairobi, where there's a huge population density, huge need, and you can make a lot of money.
Okay. I don't know the numbers, so I can't really say whether or not you can make a lot of money. So that's one thing I think is worth investigating if there is such a startup. And the other thing is, because the field is perceivably easy, which I don't think it is, it's not easy to really get into, but some people think it is. There are a lot of competitors who want to do the same thing. I mean, even in the O&P, I would say the most number of startups probably in the O&P space is, if I am a practitioner who have like 10 similar startups in India who's offering me some kind of benefits of using their technologies, like, who should I pick? Now, that's from the practitioner perspective, but from a startup perspective, is you now have like 9 other competitors that you need to convince this one practitioner that I'm the best for you. So,
yeah, but that would be that you can centrally design. That's the thing you were talking about. The central design element would really make the difference, I think.
Yeah.
And the automation, right? The automation. If I have software that automates everything from the scanning to the placement to the design, everything, then of course that's a huge time difference, and you'll be a more efficient operator.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on what the product is, what the profit margin is, what the profit margin for the local practitioners are. Also, the payment system is very different from country to country. Apparently, in India, this is not the prosthetic side of things. This is more like medical models and stuff like that. Apparently, doctors get paid when they use medical models or surgical guides and stuff like that. So there's synergy there, right? Obviously, there's economic benefit for them to adapt. So it really depends on like what the beneficial, I don't know how to describe it, this trickle down effect of profits. Obviously, we want to benefit the patient. That's really the ultimate goal. But the incentives have to be aligned with all these different elements along the way, from the company to the practitioner to the local system, to the local government, to the healthcare system. And then finally, you can provide this useful product to the patients at the end. It's like there's a lot of stuff to consider. So if okay, let's say that there is a company like this, I would say focus on some of the countries that has the most number of impact on understandable systems that's the least that's most friendly to entrepreneurs from outside. Obviously have electricity, have the capability of locally manufacturing these things, and have some kind of clinics that are already regularly seeing patients and have the population to support it. I would start with no more than a handful of countries like that, understand the system really well locally, and may actually require deploying employers to those regions to really understand the markets. So, and obviously, if you're a startup from the region, that's even better. You don't need to go anywhere else. You can just locally innovate.
All right. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you so much. It was a lot of fun talking to you.
Yeah, it's a fun exercise.
Yeah, no, I like this. I like this dreamy up startup kind of thing. We can do this more often.
Yeah, if a startup is out there, you should let me and Juris know.
Yeah, totally. Jenny has the money though, so you're probably more interested.
Not this year anymore.
Oh, okay.
For everybody.
Okay. All right. Okay, so thank you so much for being here, Jenny. It was really wonderful.
Pleasure.
And Brent, thank you for being here as well.
Oh, this has been great and very educational for me too. Thank you so much, Jenny.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you for being such an advocate for not only O&P but 3D printing and pushing forward.
My pleasure.
And thank you for listening. This was the Prosthetics and Orthotics Podcast. Have a great day. Welcome to the Prosthetics and Orthotics Podcast with Brent Wright and Joris Peels.